Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about something we haven't really heard much of in the last day and a half. I see Don put a photograph of a reasonably recent sawmill up in his last slide, but we've talked about trees and seedlings and protecting those. I'm actually going to talk about the other end of the scheme. So Toby mentioned briefly that the Specialty Wood Products is a collection of the Douglas fir, cypresses and eucalypts. So those are all rolled into our program. And you heard some information on the breeding from Toby, and you heard from Tara's presentation some of the work that's being done around the tolerance for pest. I'm just going to talk about some of the work we've done on products. So we've got some peeling studies, sawing, and some thermal modification work that Simon's been taking on some of our species. So I've got some results around those. So the peeling project, that was a project with the University of Canterbury and Marlborough Research Centre on two of the NZDFI durable eucalypt species. These were young, only 15-year-old, very small study, but we wanted to see, well, could we just peel them? And let's not worry about getting everything exactly right, but let's put them through a lathe and actually see what the products look like. So you can see there was a bit of splitting, but on the whole, the veneer was actually quite good. The mill wasn't optimised to peel these species. It was just basically run through on a radiata schedule. So it actually went really well. You can see in the next slide some of the stiffness, especially in the Basistuana, that's averaging up around 17. So that's one of the key reasons why that species is being selected, because of the stiffness of it. And you can see your friend and mine, radiata, in the middle there. That's at 30-year rotation level stiffness, about 10. So that's one of the key things why we've got the species in there, is because it's just so much higher stiffness at such a much younger age. And you can also see the other species, the quadrangulata, also having very high stiffness, again at a young age. And that same patterns with the air-dry density, again much higher than what we're seeing in pine. So we definitely got the wood properties we were looking for. The next stage, with the University of Canterbury have chopped up a whole heap of those veneers to get them to Hexion, which is a glue manufacturing crowd, to see how well they glue, how well the bonds hold, using standard radiata glue initially, and also if we need to specialise that for these products. They are much higher density. They do have higher extractive content than radiata, so we're expecting them not to glue as easily, but we don't think it's an insurmountable question to resolve. We'll also look at gluing them to radiata, so there's potential to make an LVL or a plywood product using both pine and eucalypt together. So we need to see how they glue together, as well as making a super high LVL out of one of these species. So they'll need to be glued, obviously, in a pure layup as well. And the next stage of that, we'll be looking at the economic potential for the Basistuana for LVL at that age, and also older ages, to see what it looks like. The cypresses, we're in the middle of a sawing study with a couple of clones of cypress, so Avenzii and also a clone called GH5. The main reason for this sawing study was to say, well, if we have to prune these things, and if you've ever pruned them, you'll know how hairy they are and how slow it is, can we get an economic regime from a 20-year-old unthinned and unpruned cypress stand? So if we can get some good products out of that, it makes a much cheaper growing perspective than having to prune it and thin it and grow it on much longer. So those trees have been sawn and they're currently being dried. I've got a couple of results here. I won't go into all the detail, but you can see the recovery, the green recovery there was 58%, which for small logs is actually very high. And that was due to very carefully making sure that the recovery was maximised at the sawmill. One interesting thing which surprised me, the Avenzii clone should actually be quite tolerant of canker, but we had 30% of the logs affected. Now we only had 6 trees, so that could have come from only 1 or 2 trees, but it's something we need to keep an eye on. Obviously, one of the reasons that this Avenzii has been promoted is its tolerance to canker, so we need to make sure that's actually true. Obviously, this being such a small study, we're not going to make a decision there. But so, like I say, it's being currently air dried, and it will be graded and dried at Scion later in the year. The University of Canterbury has been doing quite a bit of work over the last 2 years for us around cross-laminated timber made from Douglas fir. So you'll be familiar with cross-laminated timber. It's basically just 3 or 5 or 7 layers of timber laid at 90 degrees to each other in every layer, and has been used internationally for high-rise buildings. So we're quite keen to see how the Douglas fir performs compared to the radiata, which has been, you've probably seen quite a bit of information around radiata CLT being used. So this is sort of a 4-storey building. It's a little bit reduced scale, but that actually is just about 4 stories high, so it gives you an idea of what it looked like. You can see in the photo on the right-hand side, there's a black oval loop. That's like a sacrificial metal component that actually moves when there's an earthquake. So but instead of the whole thing breaking and falling over, that just flexes and absorbs the energy. The main things that were tested here were just a whole combination of different types of connections, mainly with really long screws. So you can see 3 different images at the bottom, how many cycles for each sort of screw pattern we went through, just to see how these things would stand up to earthquake loading and moving over time. And for scale there, I've got Shane Jones. He actually went and had a visit, was quite impressed, and was good to get some footage of people around and get some information out more into the public. So, and it's been a really successful project. So the next slide really shows where we've got to with that, showing that we've got good, strong technical evidence now that these CLT constructions can be used in mid-rise and high-rise timber buildings. So that's the sort of information that architects will need to be able to specify this and actually get the things built. So that's why we're collecting that information, so that we remove that barrier that stops people from actually specifying this product. And we've had to do it specifically for New Zealand seismic design codes. There's been some testing on Douglas fir around previously, but other countries don't tend to worry about earthquakes like we do. Scion has been doing a bit of work around a eucalyptus nitens flooring product. This was laid up in John Fairweather's mill, and it's actually his product down the South Island. There was 3 different layers. So these nitens were young. They were grown for chip, so they're only 19 years old. They weren't thin, they weren't pruned, so it's not the perfect thing that you'd be looking at to make a flooring product, but that's the type of resource we want to add value to. So we had a solid wood flooring, just standard nitens. We had some ply-backed material and also some cross-laminated nitens, all made up by John. And as I mentioned, all these logs came from Southwood Exports resource, which, like I said, is a fibre resource. And we put in a imported engineered oak flooring as a comparison to what sort of performance people were expecting to see from a flooring system. So you can see in these graphs here, the one on the left is how much bow we saw at 2 different moisture contents on our 4 different product types. And you can see 2 of the layups performed very similarly to the oak. The cross-laminated nitens actually had a little bit of bow, which is not something you want to see in a floor. It's something that's very hard to manage for. And in the other figure, it's more about cup that we saw. Again, one of the layups, the solid nitens, actually showed a more cup than what we'd want to see, but the ply-back product performed very well in both situations. So we've still got some long-term stability tests going on in that project, but it'll be excellent to see the end result and see how well it compares to the oak, and see if that can be a commercial product in the longer term. Scion also has been doing a lot of work around thermal modification of our species. The 2 benefits you get from the thermal modification are you're lifting the durability of the wood naturally. You're not adding any chemicals. It's just the process of heating the wood lifts the durability and also improves the stability of the wood. So after the modification, moisture goes in and out of the timber much slower than it would out of untreated timber. So the example you can see here is all nitens. The first 4 figures are just straight heat with atmospheric steam, and the last 2 is where we put pressurised steam in to try and lift the durability even higher. So you can see you get that naturally darker colour. That's just an effect of the modification. So the nitins, you can see here, the figure on the left is the anti-swell efficiency. So basically how much it stays stable when you put moisture on it after treatment. So you can see the control is not efficient at holding its shape, whereas basically all the other treatments, you can see it lifts quite quickly, and it's much improved over the control. The figure on the right is the durability over time. So you can see again we've got a significant lift in durability with our treated nitins over the control. You can see the control at age 9 months was almost no wood left. But unfortunately that hasn't really lifted the durability high enough for outdoor uses. It's definitely significantly lifted the durability, but it's not high enough to say, right, well, we can just use thermally modified nitins outside. It hasn't got that improvement that we were looking for there. Same thing with Douglas fir and the thermal modification. We haven't got as many months of testing here yet, but we've seen very good lift in the durability. So you can see there that the two bottom, actually I think there's 3 lines along the bottom there, untreated radiata and, Lusitanica and 2 Douglas firs. You can see after 9 months they've dropped down to a condition of about 7. The other treated species, you'll see both the sapwood and the heartwood, we've had a lift in durability, so these are only early tests, but we're hoping that those lines stay up to where the CCA treated and the H3.2 treated radiata sit. So early days on these tests, but we're encouraged to the level of treatment we've got there. And if we get some good results there, we can start looking at using a modified Douglas fir in something like a cladding outside, where currently you can't use that now without chemical treatment. And the Lusitanica, again, we've got some very good early results there for the durability. You can see how poor the durability of the untreated wood is there on the figure on the right. And the 2 red lines show the 220 and 200 degree treated 220 degree treated sapwood and heartwood. So again, that's lifted, and one of them's even lifted above the radiata treated control. So again, we're hoping that this really opens up the opportunities for these products in more applications. And the figure on the left, again, you'll see the stability of the timber significantly increased after the modification. So again, just much more stable in use. And just wrapping up in terms of talking about challenges, really what we're aiming to do in our program is really increasing investor confidence to be able to use these species. So to get these species planted, people need some idea of, yes, there are products out there, yes, we can make these things, yes, we can treat them and lift the durability. So that lifts that barrier to planting. And as I mentioned, this program, it's quite encompassing. It goes right from tree breeding through to site species mapping, developing new products, and also our sort of regional strategy work in this area to communicate the results out to key stakeholders. So that's a real rush through a whole heap of species and a whole heap of products, but feel free to contact me if you've got any further detail and I can follow up. Thank you.